Good morning, everybody. Today is August 5th, and today we're going to be talking about the new changes that are coming up with our forms in the Northwest MLS. These forms will go into effect with everybody August 17th. The Northwest MLS is going to have these changes available 2 days prior, so we will have access to all of these new updates August 15th. So between now and then, we need to make sure that we're familiarizing ourselves with the changes that are coming up. They're going to change how we do our listing presentations, buyer presentations. So these things that we're talking about today are going to probably directly translate into maybe Thursday role plays. And we need to keep in mind when we talk about people or when we talk to people about our listings and especially compensation talk, we need to make sure that we are complying with those rule changes that are coming up. So speaking of rule changes, like I said, all of these rule changes are effective August 17th. The Northwest MLS will be placing all of these forms out ready for us to use 2 days prior on August 15th. So why did these rules even start? Well, obviously we know the settlement, things that are going on with the settlement, but the reason these form changes are happening is there's a major simplification and clarification for some of these things that were very, very complicated. So the changes that are happening are going to be simplifying how we bullet point out the compensation in different scenarios. All of these changes are going to be complying with the Northwest MLS settlement, with NAR's settlement. Now, keep in mind, our Northwest MLS is not affiliated with NAR. However, the changes that we're making are kind of congruent with some of the changes that are happening with NAR. We do have some of our Northwest MLS members also being NAR members. If you're a member of the National Association of Realtors, then you are part of that conversation. However, because we are a privately owned Northwest MLS, we don't have to implement the same changes that they do. Now, the Northwest MLS already put into effect some of these things, as we know. We had changes in 2019, 2022, and 2024. And all of our changes that we've done have been talking about disclosure of compensation, talking about transparency, making it more and more clear to sellers and specifically sellers, but also buyers, that compensation is negotiable. There is no set amount. Disclosing what offered amounts are going to be, and basically making it clear that as agents, our services are not free. Now, again, effective August 17th and available to us August 15th, we are going to have access to what the Northwest MLS has changed. Now they are required to give us 30 days notice, which is why they announced this change a month ago. And that gives us time to talk about these things, kind of work out our kinks and be ready for the day everything changes over to this active rule change. In the forms that they have updated, we'll be talking about the listing agreements, the buyer agreements. When I talk about purchase and sale, I'm just going to be referring to Form 21, but this is going to be all purchase and sale agreements. And also talking about the dreaded 41C, and then touch on escalation addendums. So first and foremost, the listing agreement. Now remember, the things that I'm talking about are only the changes that are happening. So I pulled up the second page because everything on the first page will remain the same. We still need consent for dual agency, but the change happening next week is going to be based on compensation. Now, we have our standard 7A that used to be, it looks just as it used to look. It is the compensation for the listing firm. Now, the thing that was changed is the seller's offer of compensation to a buyer broker. They are adding in a clause that says, just so you know, this is definitely not required, but should you choose to offer compensation, there will be 3 options that seller can choose. Number 1, the seller can choose the same thing we've done previously, which is offer a buyer broker compensation. This is going to be box 7B. Subsection I, the first one that says seller's offer of compensation. The second thing they can do is they can ask the buyer to request the compensation be put in their offer. What this will do on our input and publicly to buyers is say negotiable rather than have a number in there. So option one is to have it as it was before, where there's a percentage. Option two is going to say negotiable. And then the third option is no compensation offered at all. So that will say either none or zero. We actually now have the option of typing in words for the compensation box. They've expanded it to 25 characters, so it no longer just has to be a number. So these three things are the things that we can put into our input sheet. Have your sellers also keep in mind, though, that no matter which box is checked, it is negotiable. So if your seller chooses at your listing appointment to offer $0 compensation, they put none in the box, it is still possible to negotiate that when you're talking about an offer coming in. We also want to make sure that we know, that our sellers know that they are not required to offer this compensation. It's just something that can be done. I kind of picture it as a marketing tool, right? So these are ways that we can just attract more buyers. And we all know that there are benefits to having another agent on the other side. But the main takeaway from here is that these are negotiable spaces. They are not required, and that seller has full flexibility on the way that they can answer those. So now I just kind of zoomed down on here. We still want to keep in mind that compensation for the listing agent and the buyer's agent have still been what they call coupled. So these are going to be two separate conversations. One, listing broker's fee, I guess, compensation fee. Second is anything offered to a buyer broker. They're still separate conversations. We are decoupling them. They are not going back together. If you have trouble understanding that or explaining that, I have a color-coded listing agreement that helps kind of define the two spaces. And I'm going to make a new one as soon as these permanent forms come out, just for explanation and input if we need it. So the second one they've changed is the buyer broker agreement. Now, this compensation is basically what is your price tag as the buyer's agent. So this is an amount that you and your buyer must set ahead of time. This is not something that you can put pay as offered or whatever the listing says. It is no longer negotiable once you have an offer put in. You have to define your price. This is probably going to be one of the things that we'll want to practice the most, because we go into when we go into this, we're going to have all sorts of things put in our compensation fields. Now, our area might still just continue to do business as usual, as we've seen with every other change up till now. So this could be a non-issue. We could be making this a lot bigger than it needs to be. But should these conversations come up, we do need to know how to respond to them. Your price must be set ahead of time. Again, you can't just negotiate when the time comes. Now, if any offer of compensation is more than what you've agreed to in this, you only have two options with these new rule changes. Option one is to give that money back to the seller. Option two is to credit that money to your buyer. There is no option for you to accept that money anymore, on behalf of the firm. We have a FSBO option that's coming up in here too. Let me zoom into some of these things. So number one, we have our price. This is our price tag that we are charging. Again, this is what we set ahead of time. If you have we always have, we have a seller representation form. We never really had anything that showed maybe a buyer representation form for FSBOs. So now we actually have a separate line item for that. So it's on 2 pages, I'm sorry. It says if the seller is not represented by a real estate firm, then the compensation shall be equal to this amount. When we have a seller representation and we are dealing with an unrepresented buyer, we know that it takes more communication. There's a lot more that goes into it. On the FSBO side, now we have the option of taking that into consideration also, and not just accepting money as a buyer's agent. You'll notice here that all of these options to credit to firm or what happens if are going to be completely removed from this form. Like I said, your only options are going to be either give it back to the buyer or give it back to the seller. If we have anything blank in a space for this 7C right here that says if there is, if it's a FSBO, what it will be equivalent to. If nothing is put in that box, the amount is going to be $0. You will get nothing additional for helping a FSBO versus something that is listed. So they're going to be hopefully clarifying some of the things with these, making it a lot more simple. Now we can always still amend this. We still have the 41A. We can always change what we've previously agreed if something comes up and our situations change. So that can definitely still be done, but these buyer agreements do need to be in place before you can actually amend anything. What has been removed from this is the seller's offer. I'm sorry, so we will be required to tell buyers of any offer of compensation amount by sellers. So that is a rule that is completely in place and will be enforced and effective August 17th. So if there's any offer of compensation whatsoever, buyer has to be aware of that offer. This can be the commission, it can be buyer bonuses. We don't really see buyer bonuses anymore, and I think we won't probably ever see them again because of these rule changes. But any amount of compensation that's being offered has to be disclosed to the buyer. This is a Washington state law. So these forms help kind of protect us against doing all the things necessary to comply with those laws. We also have no more option of that showing properties section. Sorry, here we go. Oops. We also have no more option of that properties that we're showing section. So the restrictions of I will show you these ones, but I won't show you those ones. That's also been completely removed because the idea is you're required to have this agreement in place before you show properties. So you already know that you're going to be paid. Your compensation has already been negotiable. And there's even an option for FSBOs. So that being covered removes the need to talk any further about properties that maybe don't meet the requirements that you had discussed previously. All right. Now, the 41C. The 41C has been renamed because it no longer is a place to negotiate any compensation difference. Our Washington state law says that buyer's agreements must be signed before writing up an offer. Our Washington state law says that all offers of compensation have to be disclosed to the buyer. So that being said, with those changes in place, we are not going to be seeing credits back to this or credits back from that. So they've renamed the 41C and taken off a lot of options. The 41C is now only going to have one option. It's going to be credit to buyer. So if nothing else is checked and there is a surplus in compensation offered, that you and your buyer have agreed to say you and your buyer agreed to $1,000, seller's offering $2,000. If nothing is discussed back and forth because you cannot accept more than you've agreed in your buyer agreement, the extra surplus of that $1,000 goes back to the seller automatically. Now, if you want to credit that to buyer, you're going to have to do a 41C. The only option in this is going to be credit to buyer, and then you're going to bullet point how much is going to be credited to your buyer. This form I can't wait to see in person because it being so short, it's really just for buyer credit. They've renamed it. It is no longer, I forgot what it was before, but it is now known as the addendum for buyer credit. The escalation addendum has also been updated. So this one, only one little portion has been, and that's because the question just kept coming up over and over to the Northwest MLS and the legal hotline about how to calculate escalating offers. When you're calculating an escalating offer, the net price has to take in consideration the compensation between the two offers. So if one offer is coming in saying that they are not asking the seller to pay anything in compensation, and another offer comes in at the same price asking seller to pay the compensation, then that compensation amount needs to be calculated as the actual net price of the offer. Therefore, the one not asking the seller to pay would probably be the one, the winning offer by the amount of the compensation. So when you're calculating that, they want you to also add that. It's going to be known as like a credit. So it'll be subtracted as a credit when appropriate. We can go over how to actually calculate that with real life scenarios. But the changes to this are just making it clear that when we calculate a competing offer, we have to take in consideration all the terms of the offer, including compensation being paid. So I just wanted to expand on that and just zoom in. So whether it be the buyer or the seller, any offers of compensation or concessions also have to be added when calculating the net price. For the purchase and sale agreements, I know we've been saying for a really, really long time, but it is now going to probably be more enforced than ever before that any offer of compensation has to be disclosed. Again, this is not just a law for the Northwest MLS and this form, but this is a law for Washington State. So Washington State has two laws that are directly they directly affect our purchase and sale agreements. Number one, we have to have a written buyer agreement stating our compensation, and it has to be disclosed with the buyer. And number two, any offer of compensation offered by the seller has to be disclosed in writing in the contract. So we do that by line 17. Now, in the past, sometimes we've left the line blank or forgotten to check a box. But because of Washington State law, if this box is not checked, not checked, if the compensation line is not filled in, then you are not complying with Washington law of disclosing how much compensation is being offered by a seller. It has to be in the contract. You will be leaving yourself open for potentially not having that seller pay if you don't disclose that an offer is being presented for that. I'm going to zoom in on it too. Now, they've changed the way this is written up because we're no longer going to say, oh, others see addendum, right? Because we already have in place our buyer agreement that says how much we're being paid. And we already know how much the listing has. So the buyer broker compensation is what the listing says. Now, hopefully, when you're pulling it from the Northwest MLS, these are going to auto-populate. So the offer is going to be in there. And remember, the only other option you can do is you can credit it to buyer or you can credit it to seller. So they've added a couple things to kind of bring this layer of protection around us, right? So it says buyer, it will say buyer broker compensation amount offered in listing, if any. It'll have it filled in. And then amount to be paid by seller. So you can still negotiate other offers, but you can't negotiate more being paid by seller than you have agreed to accept. Still, that has never changed. But this will also have space in the line for words. And remember, if you are negotiating or if the offer of compensation says negotiable, then you're going to want to disclose in our contracts that you have another negotiation point of that compensation being paid. So keep in mind, line 17 has a few little minor tweaks. So those are the changes that we are going to see directly.